particularly excited I am for this talk because I think Anna might win the award of the person we've tried to bring her for the longest time. And so I'm really, really pleased to have Anna Novik here. Anna directs the investment division at the OECD, which, as I was just learning, is even bigger than how big I already thought it was. But under that umbrella, Anna directs teams that are working on international investment agreements, on the international investment climate, on national investment climates and policies, and how to promote in that context good policies to support domestic investment, including on responsible business conduct, which is an area of great interest for our center. And then, as I was just learning, Anna, well, already integrates, her expertise integrates trade in other areas. She previously worked in the government of Chile on their negotiations, on their trade and investment agreements, but now with the OECD is also helping to make those links among trade, environment, and other obviously interconnected areas with investment. So without further ado, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks a lot. No, thanks all of you for being here. For me, it's really, I really appreciate the invitation. I studied here also 15 years ago in CPAC, very close to you. That means that I love this city too. But also because I have I was working in the government of Chile for more than 20 years as a trade negotiator, investment negotiator, and also in the WTO, in the Doha round, senior officials in APEC. That means that I have all this experience, and since I've been around 4 years that I'm right now in charge of the investment division, and it's very challenging when you come from the policy maker, and then you come from more academic staff, because it's more research, the OECD, and then how you help this research to translate in something that is more useful for policymakers. And this has been my challenge, I have to say, with my team. Maybe you know my David Kropiger, that he came here in the treaty, he's super good. But then how you translate this to make also information that is useful for policymakers. I decided this time because, as Lisa said, the agenda is pretty broad. Like I work in many different topics on investment, and to focus more on investment and trade and the policies approaches. Because I think that in the business reality, trade and investment in the global production are like together, but in the policy area still are not together. That means that I want to reflect with you, showing what we are doing in these kind of areas, and then what are the implications for policies. And then if we have time, I will be happy to discuss, in addition to these issues, to all investment facilitation, whatever, WTO, whatever you want to discuss related with investment and trade. Okay, why we care? I would say that the first things of why we care is related with the evidence that we have, and it's when, in the direct effect, when you have enterprises that mix trade and investment are more productive, and they get better salaries. The wages are high. That means that we just have evidence, just the direct effect, the very basic direct effect on output and salaries. When companies combine trade and investment, they perform better. But in addition to that, and this is a very interesting thing, because I think we are starting to analyze right now at the firm level data, how the business multinationals are behaving. How when they operate in different countries, what kind of strategies they choose to operate. They choose if they invest, if they trade, what they do. And in the last research that we have, in the new evidence that we have, we realize that it's much more complex, the global value chain. And it's not just investment and trade, but it's a lot of different strategic relationships in between trade and investment. If you see in the upper side that you can have full investment when you just go to a market and invest as an affiliated, or in the other side you can have just trade, that you stay there and you just send your product or import your product. But in between we have equity joint venture, when you decided together with the domestic to do a project, you have franchising, licenses, research collaboration, contract manufacturing, and when you see different industries, the relevance of this strategic partnership change a lot. And in industries where you have more research, knowledge-based industries, we realize, for example, pharmaceutical, that the strategic partnership have a bigger importance and bigger relevance than the trade and investment part. But however, and this is interesting too, the heterogeneity inside and within the sectors is different. That means that even, for example, we saw Toyota and Volkswagen, the car, and you can say that for Toyota, the strategy to, when they go and globalize, is more through investment, but for Volkswagen, it's less through investment, and they prefer to trade. That means that it's a complex war because there are not clear ways, but what we realize is that the strategic partnership that has not been very released in an important way, we realize that right now is something that is going on much more important than before. Why we care also is because multinationals, domestic and foreign multinationals, have a strong impact in economies. They represent more than 50% of the trade, is 1/3 of the output, and it's 25% of the employment. That means that whatever the behavior that they have, and they have a big impact in society. This is something that multinationals are an important actor in society. And if this is the direct effect, but if they also establish linkage with the domestic industries, they have an indirect effect that is also very relevant. And then how, from the policy perspective, we strengthen this kind of evidence that we are getting here to use it in a way that benefit more host economies. People will say, what is new? Because the GVC, I think that global value chain is something that since the beginning of the 2000s that we are listening about global value chain, and then how this is. Probably you have seen more than once the Boeing, how the Boeing is building, or the iPhone, that what part is doing for one issue, for one Taiwan, for different parts of the world. But what is new is that the importance of this global value chain are changing in a way. It's very difficult right now to find any product that you can say has been 100% produced in one country. And this is something that the prevalence of the global value production has increased a lot. And also, as I told you, that the difference also in terms of these nuances of the global value chain. It's not just one for trade or investment, but also all this new evidence of the strategic partnership. And the policies associated with this kind of changes in the business reality are not there yet. Because it's always happened that first things happen and then policies react and try to see how we deal with this new reality. The other key finding in this new research that we are doing is, as you see right now, that the heterogeneity in firms' strategies is changing, and then also we want to see why these behaviors are there and how we can influence this kind of behavior. There are new motives for FDI. Traditionally, when you study foreign direct investment, you study, business when they want to serve some market seeking, they go and invest. When they want to market efficiency, when they want to just buy some input from different parts, maybe they install some investment to produce part of the global value chain and then be sure that this part of global value chain will arrive. But right now we are also seeing some new investment motivations, and it is, for example, diversification, some kind of a conglomerate of companies that they are just choosing invest in different parts to diversify, but also some kind of investment that are for knowledge seeking. They invest in some research to have some kind of knowledge, and then they invest just to develop this kind of research or knowledge in one part on the other. And also something that is different, also that is changing, is the role of the network that we have also observed that before was, no, we will not want more investment here because we kill our domestic industry. Right now, this concept of market sickness, that is a new concept, it makes that sometimes when you have more companies around, it's better because you can cooperate, learn from each other, buy, sell. It makes more efficient the system in general. And there is some kind of stuff dealing with this kind of stuff. Why also we're here is because we realize that if we can work more in making this multinational link with the domestic industry, not just the direct effect of creating more jobs and higher wages, but also the indirect effect that they can transfer technology, they can transfer knowledge, they can make SMEs to increase their standards because they need to serve multinationals. Sometimes they need to increase their standard, then they have a bigger impact in the society. This is not by given, and this is something that we can discuss more about policies, but it's not because the multinational is there that they have a positive impact in the society. We know that has not been the case, and it's not been the case. Sometimes if the domestic countries, they don't have enough capacity to capture this kind of, and engage with them, then this will not happen. And we are also working in this M&E and SME linkage, trying to define a framework where you see how SMEs, small and medium enterprise, could link with the multinationals just with the affiliated that are there through the domestic linkage, when you source input from them or when you supply output to them. But also in all this strategic partnership, we realize that there is some policy area here that when you try to increase the positive impact of this multinational in the domestic countries, if you can deepen this trade linkage through this contract, for example, contract that make the trade provider more constant and more predictability, or to joint ventures, or to contract of, for example, research and development, this is something that also could increase the positive impact in SMEs. Also, when multinational invest in SMEs and then receive some kind of inward. And we are observing also that when they go there, SMEs many times start to be outward FDI. That means that they get a right to some kind of level, and then they can be also outward FDI. This is a little the research, or the part of the evidence. More GBC in a different way, multinational that have more importance right now, domestic and national, and the impact that they can have. But then the question is that what have been the policy approaches of that? And then regarding FTAs, free trade agreements, we are like looking at the free trade agreement, and what you can see is that each time you will see that investment treaties in the 90s were just negotiating like bilateral investment treaties, not part of the free trade. The free trade agreements were much more focused on the market side, on the goods side, and less on the investment and services side. Of course, in the 1994, when the NAFTA started with the first services chapter, the Uruguay round with the GATS, that is services, then the things of services and other elements, investments start to be part, but not like very common, I would say. That was very particular. But since the 2000, you will see that most of the agreements include investment chapters in their FTA, and or have a FTA provision. And the investment chapters also has been changing, and I'm not so sure how far you follow the investment chapters in the FTAs, but last FTAs include also investment facilitation that before was not there. The EU is including responsible business conduct that before was not there. Today also these environmental labor that are linked with the investment are also more inclusive, including more there. But it's a big change. The 21st century agreements, most of them, 70% include investment chapter in FTA. And this is not just north-south or north-north, it's also starting to be also a lot of south-south. I mean, that it's not, because something that has changed in the last 10, 15 years is that emerging countries, developing countries are also outward investors. Before, in the previous year, in the 80s, 90s, it's more like developed countries were the one that invested and the other received investment. Right now you have a lot of, not just China and the big one, but also little countries in Latin America, like my country, that is Chile, that we are important FDI outward investors in the region. That means that it changed the mentality when you are outward and inward investor. Being an investment negotiator, I can say that even though that this is true and this is happening, when investment partners are negotiating in FTAs, they negotiate in a very isolated way and more thinking about the impact of investor-state dispute settlement than really thinking in the linkage of this GBC and market openness, or it's because of the risk, and then probably we can discuss a little more about that. But this is something important that is there, but not necessarily means that it completely all these agreements are coherent and working in a good sense. This is also to show you that we also analyze the level of commitment, and the level of commitment when you look vis-a-vis the WTO regulation. You know that the WTO does not include investment, but the services agreement have the mode 3 that is investment, and then you have some kind of provision in TRIMS and in others that also talk about investment, but the level of commitment in the FTAs and in the investment chapter is much more higher than the one that have in the WTO. That means that it's really WTO plus. You have a lot of mandatory and legally enforceable provision in these chapters. What we are doing in the OECD to analyze better this, and we are starting, that means that maybe next year I can come with the results, but, but right now what we are doing is like building a taxonomy of the FTAs that allow us to analyze better how these FTAs are answering the policy reality that we see at the beginning, the business reality that we see at the beginning, and then how we can increase the impact of these FTAs there. And for doing that, what we are trying to do is like look this comprehensive agreement, but breaking a little the silos, not like looking at investment chapter, this chapter, but making some linkage between all the different chapters. And we are also assessing what are the coherence, because we know that there are some elements that are in the FTAs, but then different countries negotiate, even with different countries, even the same country negotiate different FTAs with different provisions. I mean that how you look the coherence, and there are some elements like the double tax tributation that are not in FTAs but are super important in the investment side. And then also how we can look better the firm's strategy in these FTAs. As we see, you know that there are a lot of strategic partnerships, but how these strategic partnerships are in a way captured in an FTA. And we developed this taxonomy looking a little the market making measures that are the ones that are looking for non-discriminatory market openness, addressing distortions, market correcting measures that are the ones that are trying to see in terms of regulatory, non-discriminatory regulatory, but make this agreement function in a better way, that sometimes could be responsible business conduct, but also regulatory coherence. And then the consistency, how different agreements deal with these issues of consistency. And we have this kind of approach, that we have the core investment provision on investment, that is the one that we know, that are with this kind of provision, that are, some of them are more familiar for you because are typical in the BIT, in the Bilateral Investment Treaty. But then the new, when you have like more in the FTAs, you also include market access, transfer, investment facilitation, but also we are linking these investment elements with the rest of the FTAs and see how other aspects of the FTAs, the free trade agreement, trade facilitation, intellectual property right, capital movement that normally are more in the financial chapters, market access in goods and in services, rules of origins, impact all this kind of investment. And we hope that with this kind of linkages, we will capture better what is going on in the global value chain and what is the impact. We are just starting, but I think that we will have an interesting conclusion there. One thing that is important, and we are looking when we are looking at these FTAs, is the issue of the policy complementarities. Because as you will see, in most of the agreement right now include labor, environment, not most of the agreement, but the new agreements, I would say, the CTPP, the CETA, they include much more issues. But what we realize is that the complementarities is not just to add more provisions in an agreement. You can have a comprehensive agreement that have a lot of issues, but very superficial, and maybe it doesn't make any difference. And that is happened with the responsible business conduct in many countries, in many chapters, that maybe they name it, but it's superficial. Right. That means that the extensive or the we need to see if it's extensive in a way that includes a lot, but it's not deep. That means that maybe it doesn't make too much difference. But in addition, that depending on what you have, imagine that you are an enterprise that have a big pharmaceutical investment. If you have investment policy, intellectual property rights that are very low in the agreement and you don't have a lot of certainty, maybe for you, this agreement, even though that have a lot of things, including IPR, but it's not at the level that you need, then maybe for you, this agreement will be not so useful for what this business is looking in this kind of particular countries. That means that we need to look not just how broad are, and then how deep are, but also how different linkages will have different impact depending on the industry that you are, because the linkages are super important. In addition to that, and it's just with this, I will finish this kind of presentation because I'm interested to have more dialogue here with all of you. But I just want to also add that in the OECD we look this in a very broad way, that is investment and trade, but also as Lisa mentioned when he presented me, that we like to analyze and to advise countries that when they approach the investment attraction, they need to think in an investment environment that includes 12 different policy areas. That is not just to have a predictable, transparent, and non-discriminatory law legislation about investment, but they have to look how this investment regime is cohabitant with trade, competition, tax, corruption, environment. And when it's very interesting, the policy framework of investment, because it's a recommendation that is not prescriptive, but what we have is that we describe how these 12 areas, how trade, tax, corruption, impact the decision of investment, but then we analyze the investment regime of the country with all these policies, with all these policymakers. In a way, we went to the country, we have established interagencies groups to develop this investment policy regime, and we analyze together with them how the different parts of these regimes impact not just the facilitation of the investment, but also the impact that this investment will have in the society where they are. For this reason, we say it's a whole of government approach, because we develop these investment reviews with the governments, and also we are looking for this policy coherence and good government. We have more than 30 this kind of policy reviews, and I think that countries value because they can see how policies interact one with another. And the other area of work that is super important for us is the responsible business conduct issue. I think that in this center this is an important area, and we are trying to link more the responsible business conduct with the treaty part, and we will have some new research on that. But what we do here, and in a very successful way, I would say, is that we work with policymakers, with government, to have good policies on environment, labor, and all this stuff in their countries. But the most interesting thing is that we work with business to implement this kind of responsible business conduct. And I would say this is probably the most interesting thing, because in Europe, when you are in Europe, for the European countries, this concept is very more part of themselves. But when you go to different countries, to Latin American countries, to Asian American, to Asian regions, you see that the responsible business conduct concept is much more still associated with this traditional corporate social responsibility, that is, they install some kind of schools, or they put the hospital there, or whatever, a club, a sport club, and they feel that they are doing good because they are helping the local society where they work. But the reality and the way that we want to show that this is responsible, for this reason we talk about responsible business conduct and not corporate social responsibility, because we want to transmit that the business have a responsibility in their own operation, that when they operate, when they produce things, they have not to contaminate, they have to pay well their employment, they have to be considered the consumers, but also in the supply chain. And I would say that this is a big change that we are looking right now, that they also need to take care of what is the impact that they have in the supply chain. When they buy, they need to be sure that they are buying from sources that also are responsible and are not contaminated, or not treating bad labors and all this kind of stuff. It's the most comprehensive international standard because it's the only one that leads with the environment, labor, consumer, corruption, tax. Others are more, ILO have one, but it's more labor focused. Yeah. There are the others, human rights and UN business, but it's more about human rights. We mix all these concepts, including human rights, in our concept. And it's a recommendation from government, but government need to make business to implement. And the due diligence is like also in the supply chain, as I was expecting to you. And we have also a national contact point, that an obligation of when you adhere to these M&E guidelines is that you need to have one point of contact that need to be it's a grievance mechanism. Multinationals are not fulfilling these obligations. They can make the case in the national contact point, but also it's a point to disseminate these kind of standards and make business to implement. It's open to OECD and non-OECD. It's 48 countries that part. It's not just the OECD members. And the most new, I would say, things is in 2011 when we update the guidelines that we created this due diligence process in how to help the expectation. Because maybe you remember, but when it happened in Bangladesh, big issue that Nike was accused that they were buying how it's possible that they didn't take care of in this kind of supply chain of their sources of these inputs. And then business said, okay, but how I can implement this expectation? Because consumers want me to be responsible and I don't know how to be responsible. And we developed this due diligence guidance that try to help business to implement this kind of due diligence process. These guidelines have been developed with business, with government, with other stakeholders, labor and other stakeholders, and we're trying to be very practical and very pragmatic and said, what you have to do is these 6 steps. You have first to embed the responsible policies in your operation. And then for that, you need to identify what could be your risk. What are the potential harm that you can find in your supply chain? If you are buying from cotton or textile, if you are buying textile from this country, India, okay, where these Indians are also buying their cotton, and then you trust, you trace your supply chain, you identify what are the potential harm that it can have, and then you can, before going there, you can prevent or mitigate the potential harm that you can have. You track your performance, you report, this is very important, and then create the remediation. The interesting thing is that it's a risk-based approach because you don't have to take care of all the elements that you find in your supply chain, it will be too much, but then you said you have to prioritize depending a lot of the severity and the likelihood of this kind of stuff. And it's flexible because each industry is implementing in a different way, and we have a lot of work with industry, with specific industry, companies inside the industry, and it should be an ongoing process because it's always changing depending on where you are. That means that you need to continue tracking what you are doing there, and we advise business that this engagement should be the last resort because we want that they do that, but not, because this is too risky, we will not buy mining in Republic of Congo. No, it's on the contrary. Help them to raise the standards on this kind of stuff. And this is an important standard, I would say, and it's linked to make this GVC, global value chain, more responsible. And the last slide that I have, why all that we have discussing today matter, because I think that this is important, why we are discussing about GVC and RVC. And I have this kind of ideas that we can continue, we can discuss also with you more. But first, that globalization in terms of measures is slowing down, in terms of measure, right? In terms of the trade and investment. If you see trades are going down, investment is going down, and part of this going down is because of, could be trade war and these things that is going on in the world, but part is also, and this is what we are looking in the evidences, is because of the change of strategies. Because sometimes companies are deciding not to invest or trade, but do this strategic partnership that is something completely different. Digital changes have making also these GVCs completely different, and this is how the digital changes in firm strategies are really driven by digital transformation. All this 3D printing will have a big impact in the global value chain, because we'll have maybe the patterns of trade and investment will change because of the 3D printing. Maybe you will trade less in terms of the chair will not just go in there like you will produce the chair in this place, and these have a lot of impact also in job, in skills, that have another implication. But policies adding new restrictions also is something that we are living right now. There are new restrictions that many times respond to serious and real concerns, security concerns that before were different than before. In the security concerns, 10 years ago were more where investment were to strategic sectors. Right now, where investment go to digital, where investment came from SOEs, state of enterprise, particularly if they came from China, then these countries start to be more conscious about that. and this have an impact in the GDC and in the business behavior and the business impact. The other important issue, much more stronger in countries like United States and Europe, is the backlash against globalization. This is more stronger. It's stronger here than in emerging countries, but this responds to a reality, and the reality is that people don't see that the impact of trade and investment as doing something good for them. And then there is something that we need to show, or if it show in a way, communicate that this is happening, and if it's not happening, fix, and then try to do what other domestic or international policies do we need to make this happening. And the level playing field is another issue that also impacts the GDC, but it's a super important issue today. And they are distorting completely the trade and investment relationship, because it's true that if you negotiate or you implement, operate with SOEs or with countries that are providing subsidies, or then of course the level playing field, or with less responsible business conduct, and then you are lowering the standards of environment, labor. You are not in a level playing field, and this is important in the global production. This is my presentation, and thank you for listening to me. Right now, I think.
Do you have any questions?
Question or comments?
Comments? Okay, you have a couple. You go in the order your hands went up. Clemens, you go first, and then you go.
Before starting, one issue. All of you are lawyers, or not? Are studying law, or are a mix of people here around?
Good question. I think most. Can you raise your hand if you're not at the law school?
Just one.
Okay, so mostly at the law school.
Okay. Two. Okay. Clemens, you want to go ahead, and then we will.
Okay.
Thank you for this presentation. I would be interested in having your views on the current proposition for a multilateral investment facilitation agreement that are going on at the WTO. Do you think there's a case for, as you said, trade and investment are the two sides of the same coin, so should we regulate investment under the WTO framework? And so what's the OECD stance?
You want me to go away and answer like this, and then maybe we can...
Should we maybe take one more question, and then you can answer that? Yes. So we'll take yours, and everyone else think of good questions.
Thank you for your presentation. I think it's very interesting to approach this question of sustainable investment in global value chains through the perspective of risk management, because you will start, basically at the level of firms' activities, but there are a lot of questions arising from the fact that, corporate social responsibility issues and norms are not very, let's say, adapted to the particular situation of developing countries. Is there any way that you have found within the OECD to include developing countries in the process?
Okay, perfect. The multilateral investment framework, it's an interesting process. We are invited at the OECD. They invite the OECD to also help the WTO. The WTO is in a big crisis right now, and we know that the issues, sometimes the imminent issues, don't allow to have the big perspective, And right now, because of the trade war, because of the tension between China and the United States, because of the appellate body crisis, that if they don't name the appellate body, we will not have an appellate body settlement. It's a lot of, and in one moment was a threat to the United States that she will leave the WTO. I don't think that they will, but that means that all these kind of issues make this 4 elements that were agreed on the ministerial in Argentina, that is investment facilitation, SMEs, e-commerce, and I don't remember the 4th one, but it was someone 4, to negotiate in a more plurilateral way, in a less, I would say, relevance today in this big discussion of the global system and structure system. But in any way, these two, I would say that the SMEs is not moving too much, and the other that I don't remember, not moving too much. The two that are moving more is the e-commerce, and e-commerce stronger, I would say, and the second is investment facilitation. The investment facilitation discussion right now is what they are trying to do is not to include this strong investment provision. It's not this national treatment is out, MFN, market access. It's not it's all the things that are more in the core of investment treaties are not there in the table. In the table, what it is all the issues that are not in this core investment market access, but facilitating more transparency, licenses, how you do like a licenses in a more like easy way, that in a way define all the regulations that you have, how to make it more coherent, more streamlined regulations, notifications. It's more this part of the agenda, the one that they have there. The problem is that there are 70 countries, that is not, it's an important number, but important countries like India, South Africa are out. United States is there, but not really there. That means that this is a questioning in the OECD, in the WTO, if you can have multilateral rules that will apply only for some of them.
Right.
And then, because this is the multilateral issue, and I would say this is for e-commerce, but for investment facilitation too. If they have to extend the obligations that they agree among themselves to the rest of them, that this is what will make this multilateral, it has some disadvantage, because the free riders of the others that will have the advantage of having this benefit but not have any obligations, make this kind of plurilateral negotiation a little tricky. They haven't decided that, but they are moving. I think that the WTO, if they want to, if it want to be relevant, it should have investment issues without doubt. I believe that it should, because it's true that as we see right now in this world of global production, not having trade rules and not having multilateral rules is like a multilateral rules on investment will be very useful for many of other things. You know, for investor states, if you say they want to have one rules that you can have more predictability, better jurisprudency, all this kind of stuff will be ideal. Right now, we are not there. The WTO is in a big crisis. What they are negotiating on investment is very narrow. It's a good start, but it's narrow. That means that will not solve our big problem on investment issue. In fact, the other day we were discussing with David that in the logic of the WTO, when you don't fulfill, or you are like having a problem with a measure in the dispute settlement process, is okay, put your measure in conformity. In the investor state, it's a fine. It's an amount of money that make it create an incentive. If the investment is in the WTO, maybe you will ask the government, put your measure in conformity, and then you will have a less incentive there. But we are not there yet right now. I would say that still we are, if you know. But I'm one that will support completely to have multilateral rules in the WTO. Regarding your question, yeah, the sustainable in GBC is this is what we are working in the supply chain, and we involve developing countries. It's not just OECD developed countries who are leading there. We work a lot with developing countries, and you're right that for many developing countries or SMEs, they said, there is an issue of cost in implementing and improving these standards, and I have to say that the cost issue, we're trying to show first that there is a business case also for this kind of, because if you, for example, in Europe right now, that you have these obligations in France, in the Netherlands right now are also sinking, in the UK, the obligations to show that you are not sourcing from companies that are with human rights or sometimes with a labor issue, then you need to have these standards, because if not, you cannot serve this kind of market. That means that there is a business case. And then SMEs issue also, we are working with them on that, because we think that this flexibility approach that we have, that they need to prioritize what are the risks, where are the risks, and deal at least with this kind of risk. This is something that we can do. And in addition, it's interesting that we are working also with China, with India, not with the government, but with companies, because some companies and Chinese companies, when they go to Africa in the mining sector, they have a lot of complaints, and then a lot of civil society looking at them, and then they started to realize that they also need to implement these kind of standards. If not, consumers will start to condemn them. There is some civil society expectation of the behavior of companies. I mean that this is changing, and the way that we are dealing with them is in this way of a flexible approach where they can identify, and for the small and medium enterprise or developing country sources, understanding that this is the new reality, because this is what they will demand when you want to sell in these markets.
Moha, go ahead.
Thank you. I don't know if you could develop some thoughts on the role of sovereign wealth funds, because one of the major concerns are that they are accumulating so many power that they could destabilize markets. So, and also they've been criticized because they are not so transparent. So, are those best practices that you're mentioning, could also those practices be applied to the sovereign wealth funds?
Yes. You know that in the 2008, I think that in the OECD, when these sovereign wealth funds start to be important investors, and important investor in strategic infrastructures, telecommunication stuff, a lot of awareness of this kind of social wealth funds start to arise, and then we develop some kind of standards in a way that how to make it more transparency, less discriminatory. Right now, I have the national security concerns that are related with this sovereign wealth fund, but in a different way, are more as SOEs, more from the SOE's perspective than the wealth fund. There are some standards. It's true, and the transparency issue is one of the issues that I think that we got it, and then right now they are much more transparent where they're investing, how they are investing, all this kind of stuff. But it's more right now focused on the national security and SOEs than in this kind of wealth fund. What is new, I would say here, is right now after the SDG, when they approved the Sustainable Development Goal, that they said, okay, private investment have private investment or investment have a role to play to get from millions to billions to get the Sustainable Development Goal. This kind of sovereign wealth funds start to be super attractive. Oh, this institutional investor, there are money there. Why we don't put this money in this kind of good project? And they change a little the mentality, because before was more, as you said, more in the security arena. Right now, I saw some changes regarding this sovereign wealth fund in a way like there are potential to channel this kind of money that is accumulated there to do something good, you know. And then there are other channels, there are other interesting discussions, because also there are some, many of them, for example, are pension funds. And then the people that are making this kind of administration of this pension fund, they are thinking, okay, but I need to be sure that these pension funds will give pensions to the people at the end, and not so much if these are doing good on the environment or an impact on the development area and project. But there is some kind of tension there, but on the other hand, it's something that is happening. But in summary, yes, I think that right now the transparency, they are more transparency thanks to this work that we did in the past. It's the national security concern that is something similar to what was in the past, the concern with these sovereign wealth funds. Is right now a little shifting, I would say, to the SOE's technology, digital, is a little shifting this time. And I would say that right now, probably they are looking more these funds to get something good to the worry that they have before. This is the sensation that I have.
Could we take maybe one last question? Is that okay?
Yes, but or one or two, yes.
Okay.
I was interested in how, and to what extent do you think the Belt and Road Initiative standards also are similar to your organization's standards for investing in the developing world, because it is one of the largest investors in Africa and Asia. Are they similar in terms of what they?
No, this is a super good question, because it's true that we are trying. The Belt and Road Initiative is a very tricky initiative, because it's a geopolitical initiative. That means that there are some tension that is related with the geopolitical impact of this kind of initiative. But in terms, that means that, but putting this aside and just looking the investment that they are doing there, and if they fulfill the standards that we are promoting here, we say that they are not there. And then we are trying to approach China to these kind of standards, and we are trying to say to China that it's true that if they want to play in this global world, they need to be closer to these standards, and this is one of the issues, and it's very related with your question, is that next year the G20, Japan will be hosting the G20, and one of the most important topics for Japan will be quality infrastructure investment. Quality infrastructure investment. When they say quality, they mean infrastructure investment that is with environment, social governance issues, and institutional issues. And in a way, what they are trying to say is that because there are other infrastructure investment that is not the quality part, because they don't have this kind of strategies, that means that yes, there are some concerns that this Belt and Road initiative not necessarily fulfill the standards that we are promoting in this other part, and I think that Japan is putting on the table in the G20 exactly this topic because of that. We don't have, of course, there are some specific cases that is very evident that this happened, because we said we have some news in Thailand and project, others that is less evident, but in general, I think that they don't feel that they are obliged for this kind of standards, and other countries that work with our standard, we are pushing them to apply to these standards.
Great. Is there any final question? Okay. Make it count, it's the final question.
Well, you've talked about the digital economy, and it's interesting to see how the digital market offers new opportunities where to raise awareness on due diligence issues. But you've also said that digital economy changes the shape and form of global value chains. Does this go with particular new risks?
Yes. No, yes, digital, we don't know, we are working on that. I think that the digital is something that is happening in a so fast track, in a so fast manner that it's very difficult to, we are trying to deal with that. But I would say that in your particular question, the digital provide a lot of good opportunities in the supply chain, because you have all this possibility of traceability. Well pronounced when you say traceability when you trace, traceability. You know, my English is like traceability. That means that because you can, with the digital, with blockchain, for example, all these kind of new technologies, you can really see where is the source. You can fit the supply chain, and then have the information that you need for making this kind of global chain. But on the other hand, it's true that put a lot of different challenges, because of the way of doing business is changing, and then the kind of job is changing, and then because also this responsibility is the quality of job, how this impact this other part, you know, that there are less control of when people work in a more independent way, how is the implementation of all these standards in this kind of more atomized situation. That means that put a lot of challenge and a lot of questions, I would say. But also provide some good benefit for the implementation of the standards.
Can I invite everybody to give a Columbia vote of thanks? For a very long time. We know you have a million things to do, so we really appreciate it. Thank you very much.